Yeah, Dan, thank you so much for inviting me. It's a good chance to have a good talk about some very important issues. And yeah, let's roll. Let's do it.
Great, John. Thank you very much. Really appreciate you.
Okay. So I think the main question we want to discuss today is about Putin's right his presentation, his meeting with the people, like with 4.5 hours, I believe.
Yeah.
And that's incredible. What other world leader can do that, right? Not a single world leader can do that. First of all, that right off the bat, that's very impressive. That there's a world leader who actually can master the details of all these important issues, both at home, his home, and abroad, international relations. And I've always said it's important that we listen to him. And I worked many years with the liberal media. I was 15 years. I was in the liberal Western media, in the heart of the beast. And I would tell friends, I'm like, let's at least listen to my colleagues and friends. Let's at least listen to the Russians. Let's listen to Putin. And they would say, no, we don't need to listen to them. John, we have our orders. Attack Russia, denigrate Russia. Let's go after Putin. Let's sock it to him. He's bad. He's evil. And I'm thinking, so Dan, this is part of my conversion. I'm like, guys, I thought we were all for free speech. I thought we were for, peace, love, harmony. Let's get along. Let's work things out. It turns out not. Turns out most of my now former liberal colleagues in the major media, turns out they aren't like that at all. So let's have a free and open discussion. And one of the first things that really struck me as interesting about his proposal to have a technological duel, right, with the West, with the U.S. Was that interesting?
Yeah, well, it's like the old days with the Soviet Union. I always joke, if it weren't for the Soviet Union, the U.S. wouldn't have done anything, right? I mean, without Sputnik, we wouldn't have gone to the moon. We welcomed that competition back in the day, and it made us better, right?
Right.
And by the way, it made us better in many ways. In fact, legislative history shows that, for example, the Voting Rights Act that gave African Americans in the South the right to vote, that was very much inspired by the competitiveness with the Soviet Union.
Right. Yep.
And you get the impression, in fact, without the Soviet Union, a lot of things wouldn't happen. I think all this welfare state and all that was inspired by that. And so I think for Putin to say that, again, I think the U.S. needs that competition because, frankly, we have fallen behind in many, many ways technologically.
Oh, and that's an excellent point, and that's what surprised me today about our so-called liberal elite in America. They have this blind hatred of Russia. It's this rage. It's this wish to destroy Russia, and we never had that with the Soviet Union. Do you remember? I mean, no. I'm 56. I remember with the Soviet Union, it was like there was a significant amount of Americans who thought we got to get along with them. We got to work things out. We had a foreign policy elite, for the most part, that thought we had to get along with the Soviets. They understood that. Yes, there were some hardcore far-right elements in the military and the CIA, but for the most part, maybe it's my, tell me if I'm wrong, but my memory of the 80s was there's a strong peace movement. Remember that? There was a strong peace movement in the U.S. and in Europe, of course. Strong movements against putting American missiles into Europe. Remember Samantha Smith? Remember what a hero she was in America? So she was a hero, right? She was this peace emissary, this young girl, 12 years old, and she goes to the Soviet Union as a peace ambassador, people-to-people diplomacy, and she was a hero for a lot of Americans. Can you imagine that today? No American can possibly stand up publicly today and say, I support friendship with Russia. You can't say that in America today. I mean, they'll slap you down. They will slap you down so hard. I mean, I know it happened to me. So you're right. We are it's a very different ball game today. So, just one thing about the technological duel. I thought that was, again, very interesting because Putin was taunting, right? He's taunting the West, saying, come on, you bring your best air defenses to a location and we're going to blow them up. And of course, the West, shrugged it off. I think because they're afraid. And he was so confident. And this is interesting because Putin is very careful. He's very cautious. He doesn't boast. He doesn't brag. So the fact that he made this offer to have this technological duel, it shows that he's very confident that they can win, that the Russians can win, that they're better, that Russian missile technology is much better than American than Western anti-missile technology. So, and you feel it. I mean, of course, Washington and the Pentagon, they're not admitting it, but you just kind of feel it. They're scared. They are really, right? Do you feel it?
Yeah, no, and I'd like to see China have a speed train race with Amtrak. That might be interesting. No, I think all these things are good. And again, as you say, even when Stalin was the leader, Roosevelt got along well with him. Even Churchill did to some extent. And Kennedy, there's photos of him hugging Khrushchev. I mean, no Soviet leader was vilified like this. This is really something extraordinary that we're seeing.
Yeah. It's and again, as someone, I call myself now a former liberal. I try, in general, I try to avoid all types of labels. But let's say I'm like a former liberal, because I worked, as you know, for many years in the belly of the beast, of the mainstream media beast. And I just don't remember anything in the liberal media before. I remember seeing such hatred directed towards one world leader. Why? It's like the question sometimes I want to answer. I try to answer for myself is, why do they hate him so much?
And why? Yeah.
Why?
Exactly.
What do you think? Why? I struggled. I have an idea, but what do you think? Why do they hate him so much?
Well, I mean, I think the reason, and Stephen F. Cohen, who was a great Sovietologist, said this, they resent him because he got the bear back on its feet. Mm-hmm. They thought when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia would be, this third world country that, would not be able to compete with the United States. And they resent the fact that Putin, made them a competitive power again. That's what it comes down to. Same reason people hate China. Same reason. And it's irrational. And there's no reason why the American people should internalize that type of hatred, because it's not good for us.
Yeah. Right. I mean, the chasm between the American ruling elite and the American people, it's vast, right? It's vast. Oh, my goodness. Here I am. I live just outside of New York City. I walk around, and for the most part, people are decent. They just want to live their lives. They go about their lives. They're struggling, trying to make a decent living, middle-class people. And then you look at our elite. And by the way, so I just real quick, as you know, as a journalist, but I was also, for a number of years after journalism, at a PR agency. And some of my clients were very wealthy people in Manhattan. One of them was actually a close friend of George Soros. So I got to meet George Soros and a few of these other oligarchs. And what did I divine? What did I discern about them? Probably things which are not going to surprise you, but yes, they exist on a different planet, on an entire different planet. They look down at the rest of society. I mean, again, nothing to surprise you here, but I'm confirming what we all suspect and what we all pretty much know. And they think that they know better, and they're going to ram it down our throats. Right. And that's it's really just as simple as that. They figure we have the money, we have the power, and we're going to do what we want. And you know what, Dan? That's almost like, in some ways, I want to say that's fine. I mean, I really don't, morally speaking, I don't think that's fine. But what I mean is that, in a way, that's the way it's always been in human history. Rich, powerful people call the shots. Okay, guys, come on. It's always been like that. It's been like that since, for thousands of years. The problem here is that we live in a country where that same ruling elite, that hypocritical ruling elite, they say we're the freest, most democratic country in the world. That's what pisses me off. Like if they just came out and said, listen, we're a brutal oligarchy. We're going to stomp on your face. If they came out and said that, I'd be like, thank you, guys. Thank you for at least saying the truth.
Right.
But they don't say that. They lie to us.
Yeah. No, it's more like 1984. But the truth is the mask is falling. I think the rest of the world sees that. And many Americans see that it's not true. Jimmy Carter said years ago that we don't have a functioning democracy. And it's true. We have the greatest democracy money can buy, apparently. So.
Yeah. And really, removing that false veneer of legitimacy, that's very, very important. And by the way, there was something I wanted to discuss about this. Yeah. Why is one of the questions is, why do you think, why does America continue with this charade that we're the most free, the most democratic country in the world? Why is it so important? Like, why is it so important for them to say, right? They say Ukraine is a great democracy. It's not. Come on, everyone knows it's a brutal totalitarian regime. But why does the U.S. insist on this lie that Ukraine is a great democracy, the U.S. is a great democracy? What do you think? Why is that so important to have that ideological veneer?
Yeah, I think one, because it is the our very identity. It's the U.S.'s, I would say, grand myth. It's very important to the mythos of the United States, and every country has its myths, of course. Though I think our myths are a little more unquestioning and unquestionable. But also it's a pretext. I mean, what the U.S. is never going to say, or rarely will say, we're going to invade this country to take your oil. The only person who ever said that was Donald Trump, if you remember. He said that about Syria. But rarely do we say that, because we know that won't fly with the American people. We know it won't fly with other countries, so we need a pretext. So the pretext is we're spreading freedom and democracy, which sounds great. But as you say, it's just not true. Again, it's being more and more people know it's not true. If you look at what's happening in Gaza, what the U.S. is supporting there, I mean, it's an absolute abomination.
Right.
It calls a lie to everything. But again, we cling to this myth to justify our continued expansion. It's how we justified murdering Native Americans. It's how we justified slavery. It's all in the interest of some abstract greater good.
Yeah.
Even though it's not. Yeah.
That's true. I had so if we go, let's go back to Ukraine and this talk about possibly having well, first of all, Moscow said they're not going to negotiate with an illegitimate leader. Zelensky is illegitimate, right? No, he has not. His term has ended, and he did not have another election. So, what is Moscow going to do? I mean, so is Ukraine going to have elections? Do they need to have elections? Is there any point in having elections? I think Ukraine is just an American protectorate. So, yes. Should they have elections, right? I mean, and what type of approach should Moscow take to Ukraine? Because again, it's an American protectorate. Is there any point even talking to Ukraine? What do you think?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think, first of all, Zelensky he may be the de facto president, but he does not have the de jure power because his term ran out months ago, right? So that puts, who has the authority to even negotiate for Ukraine? And I agree, there should be elections. I think the problem for Zelensky is he would not win. He's very unpopular. But there's, in Ukraine, they say, well, how can we organize elections during war? Well, I'll tell you how. Russia organized elections in what was Eastern Ukraine, right? And I was actually an election observer in Kherson when they voted for the president in the Russian presidential elections. So the answer is it can be done. And in fact, it should be reminded that Abraham Lincoln did not suspend elections, even during the Civil War.
Good point.
So it can be done. They just don't want it done because they know Zelensky will lose, But I think it should happen, so we know who, again, minimally know who should be negotiating with Russia.
But how can you have free elections in what is probably one of the most brutal totalitarian regimes, right? We know what's happened to the repression against the Russian Orthodox Church. It's unprecedented. I've never seen, no country on earth has such repression. There's more religious freedom in totalitarian China. There's more religious freedom in China than there is in Ukraine. So the repression, right, the horrible scenes of people being dragged off the street, forcibly conscripted into the Ukrainian army. It just went. We see these videos, dozens and dozens every week. So we know it's a mass phenomenon where Ukrainians don't want to fight for Zelensky. They don't want to fight. They don't want to die. Yeah. They know what's happening. So it's a brutal regime, absolutely brutal. They're shooting their own people who try to escape. That is something out of the Berlin Wall, right? Remember, terrible East Germany, who was shooting its people that were fleeing. Well, democratic Ukraine is now shooting its people who are trying to free the beauty and freedom of Ukraine, right? So it's like, I want to say to Uncle Sam, hey, Uncle Sam, do you? Of course they know. Of course they realize what's happening. Of course they know. But my point is, what should they even bother with elections? I mean, there will be no. My point is, there's no free elections. There will be no free elections.
Right. There can't be a free. Right. And as you say, they've actually been shelling Orthodox churches. They're now kidnapping 18-year-olds off the street to conscript them. And by the way, upon the orders of Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who told Zelensky to conscript 18-year-olds, even though he balked at it, right? But they're doing it anyway. So I agree with you. This is there is not a as we say, I'm a labor lawyer, as we say in the labor lawyer business, there are not laboratory conditions for a free election at this point.
Yeah, but as we know, the U.S. has to continue with that facade, that charade that Ukraine is a great democracy and Zelensky is the new Churchill, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Oh, there's a question about did you see it when he spoke to the mass media, to the Russian people? So that one journalist, the one American journalist, right, from NBC, I believe,
Right.
he began his question with a taunt, right? He denigrated the Russian president, calling him a weak leader. I mean, it's like, of course, you and I, we know this is how the American, and I don't want to call him a journalist. This is how the American propagandists operate. We know this,
right?
And let's be very clear: there are no journalists in major media today. There's only journalists in America in independent media, right? Major media, they're just all propagandists. So they have their orders, they have their marching orders. Go into that press conference and you denigrate the Russian president. You try to stick it to him every chance you get. But what was your impression of watching that moment? I mean, was it embarrassing, right, as an American?
Yeah, definitely embarrassing. But honestly, I think the more interesting thing was that Putin took the question. An American president would never take a question from a Russian journalist,
right?
Much less one that was framed in that way. I mean, again, to me, what is telling is that Putin is willing to take questions like that. He's not afraid of that. Look at Biden. When was the last time he even had a press conference? Kamala Harris never had a press conference running for president. If you put Putin up against Biden or Lavrov up against Blinken, I mean, there's no comparison. The Russian counterparts are much more intelligent, much more versed in history, and again, much more willing to deal with critical questions.
Yeah. Yeah, but still, but the big problem, as we know, is that the Anglo-American media controls the airwaves, so to speak. They control the information flow globally. And as someone who worked, so I also worked, in addition to the New York Times and Bloomberg, I worked 2 years at Reuters TV. And actually, it was only 2 years, but I really got to understand the power of the Anglo-American media. So most people probably don't know, Reuters is the single most powerful media outlet on the world. Because I saw with my own eyes, it was my job, we were providing content to major media all over the globe. So not just in America, not just the US and UK, but we were also sending stuff to Japan, to Africa, Middle East. All these major media across the globe were buying our content. Reuters controls a vast amount of the global content, and then the other half is controlled by the Associated Press, which is American. Yeah. So you see, we see how the Anglo-American media has a stranglehold, not just in their own countries, but globally. And so,
even RT will use Western media, right? I mean, we'll refer to Western media reports. Absolutely.
Right. So how does Russia break through that informational blockade, all the censorship, disinformation, right? This is a question that I've posed to Russian colleagues, and it's a Herculean task to try to break through that blockade. What do you think? Do you have any ideas how to break through it?
Well, I think it's hard. I think they're doing better than they used to. I think RT has been pretty effective. I think America was very effective before it closed down. And that's why the U.S. is going after RT, because it does have an impact. And that's the irony. Again, when I was a kid and the Soviet Union existed, we had the Voice of America, which we still do. But I remember back then the Soviets at times would jam the Voice of America, and the response in the U.S. was, "Look at how wrong that is. They can't deal with freedom of speech, so they have to jam Voice of America." Well, what's the U.S. doing to RT and other Russian outlets? Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. Just another question had. About so according to Putin, so Zelensky, he serves the interests not of his people, but of course of his country. And what do you think is going to be the fate, Zelensky's fate eventually? Because it's going bad for Ukraine. It's going to end badly. We all know that Russia's fighting for its survival, so Russia's not going to lose. They're going to keep fighting. What do you think is going to happen to Zelensky eventually at some point?
Well, first I could see him going the way of DM, who was the South Vietnamese leader that the U.S. installed, and then the CIA killed him and his brother when they tried to make peace with North Vietnam. I could see an analogous thing happening to him. But if he does survive, I think ultimately he'll end up fleeing, probably to the West. It would be kind of hilarious if he fled to Russia, which, by the way, I think he could, and I think they would take care of him. But in the end, I think he'll probably take his millions that he's stolen from Western aid and move to the Caribbean or something. That's my prediction.
Probably billions, right? Probably maybe
Probably
a billion.
billions.
Probably a billion or two. I'm thinking that he might end up like Il Duce, right?
He'll be hanging upside down from a lamppost. That is the other option.
Like
and it may be his own people who do it. Yep, that's right.
I'm sure they want to. I'm sure there's people thinking about it. Probably maybe some generals, maybe just some other people. Yes. I used to work with and visit Ukraine quite often, both as a journalist and then when I had my PR agency. And there's a lot of people there still who have common sense. I think they're scared, they're intimidated, they're hiding, they're underground. And as you know, the flow of information, of reliable information from Ukraine, there's very little credible information coming out. But we hear things about an underground partisans who are fighting against the fascist Nazi regime in Kiev. I hope that information is true. I really hope the Ukrainian people are fighting against the regime in Kiev. That would be very, very encouraging. But as far as trying to solve this conflict, so here we have what 4 more weeks, new president, and okay, we know American foreign policy. It doesn't change. It pretty much doesn't change. It's pretty much been the same for the past 130 years. Since we conquered Philippines and Hawaii and Puerto Rico, it's pretty much been imperial policy for the past 130 years. So I don't expect any changes, but my feeling is that the U.S. is exhausted with Ukraine. The ruling class is exhausted with Ukraine. They want to focus on China. They see China as the biggest threat. So maybe Trump will cut a deal, but the sticking point is going to be the issue of neutrality, or whether or not Ukraine is taken into NATO. And I feel that the West is the ruling elite is probably thinking this: hey, we've invested $300 billion in this project called Ukraine. We want dividends. We want to reap the profits. We're not going to give it up. We're going to take Ukraine. So I don't think Moscow is going to get that neutrality. It wants Ukrainian neutrality. I don't think it's going to get it. I don't think the West, even under Trump, who promises peace, I don't think the ruling class is not going to relent. They're not going to let Trump agree to a neutral Ukraine. So the war will go on. What do you think? What do you feel? What's your feeling?
Yeah, although I think that point may become moot because I think Ukraine will not exist as it does or as it has. The territory that Russia has taken will not go back to Ukraine.
Yeah.
And even further territory may be taken by Russia, like Odessa, for example. So what's left of Ukraine may not be seen as a great threat to Moscow. And the military will be destroyed, the Ukrainian military. So there may be a compromise there because, again, whatever's left that may go into NATO may be completely, impotent at that point. So, but we'll see. I think there probably is a deal there, but let's see, again, if Trump has the wiggle room to even make that deal, given the competing interests in the United States.
Yeah, that's possible. Now, but still, we're going to have, most likely, unfortunately, a situation where there's going to be a lot of Ukrainian Nazis left,
Yes.
unfortunately. And they're going to continue terrorist attacks against Russia, I think. That could be a problem for years to come. But even more interesting, unfortunately, they could be committing terrorist attacks against the West. Because if the Ukrainian Nazis, if they feel betrayed, they might go after their former masters in the West. I'm starting to wonder if that's going to be a possibility. And look how Zelensky is already threatening the head of the Slovak state. I'm sorry, the Slovak president, right? Or he's the prime minister. Zelensky is openly threatening him, right. And that's a harbinger of things to come. That the Ukrainians, basically Zelensky and the Nazis, are saying, if you don't, okay, yes, they're puppets. Yes, Ukraine is a protector of the U.S., but at the same time, they're saying, okay, if you stick a knife in our back, if you betray us, we might come back. We might come after you. We might come after you in London, you in Washington, you in Brussels. So Ukrainian terrorism could become a problem also for the West. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, of course. Well, we've seen historical precedent in Al Qaeda, which was originally the Mujahideen that the U.S. supported, helped create. In ISIS, which again the U.S. helped create. We create all these Frankenstein's monsters, and then we're surprised when, as you say, they turn on us. Of course, it seems almost inevitable that sort of thing's going to happen, at least to some extent.
Right? Yeah, that's true. Let me just tell you one story from my work. So when I had a PR agency, I had one client. It was the Ukrainian American Cultural Foundation, and it was kind of obnoxious stuff at first. Art exhibitions, and then some books about Ukrainian art, Ukrainian history. And this is like 2016, 2017. And they start saying, "Oh, we're gonna have a book about Ukrainian history, and we have to promote this book." I'm like, "Yeah, okay, I like history, whatever." At this point, remember, I'm absolutely politically neutral. It's like, okay, it's a client, it's a book, we got to promote it. And then I'm like looking at the contents. It's about the great Ukrainian state that existed in the 12th century, in the 11th and 12th century. And I'm thinking, oh my God, this is insane. There's no Ukrainian state. There was a Ukrainian, short-lived Ukrainian state in 1919, guys. That's it. Get off. Just get off it. Stop. There was no Ukrainian state in the 11th century. And they're talking about the great Ukrainian princess Anna. This is what scares me. They are so delusional because they sincerely believe in it. These are hardcore, true believers in this mythical past, this great Ukrainian past that, of course, you and I, any rational, educated person, know it didn't exist, but they believe it. So they're living in this horrible delusion, and that delusion, these feelings of grandeur, these delusions of grandeur they have, and that's going to be, how do you eradicate that? It's just it's like with 1940 in the 40s.
It's exactly the same. Yeah.
You have to entirely eradicate it. You can't reason with these people. You can't negotiate with these people. They're not rational.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right.
Another question about in the Kursk region, right? Let's take a look at Kursk. We've all heard about how the White House has told the regime in Kiev to hold on to Kursk no matter what. Sacrifice any amount of bodies, Ukrainian soldiers, just to hold on to that small salient in Kursk. So the White House is quite fanatical about holding on to Russian territory. Well, I mean, Donbass is Russian territory, Zaporozhye is Russian territory. As we know, it's under occupation. And yeah, by the way, I don't like it when people talk about the war in Ukraine. There's no war in Ukraine. The war is in southwest Russia. It's in Zaporozhye region. It's in Donbass region, right? It's in Kursk region.
Belgorod as well.
Belgorod.
Yeah.
This is where the war is. Yeah. Of course, Russia launches missile strikes against targets in Ukraine because it has to. It has no other choice. It's fighting for its survival. But going back to Kursk, what is your feeling about what's happening there and the strategy of the West in trying to hold on no matter what the cost?
Well, I think it's crazy. I think it risks nuclear war. Could you imagine if the tables were turned, if Russia were supporting Mexico in invading Texas and trying to hold land in Texas, for example? How long would the U.S. put up with that?
Right, about 3 seconds.
Yeah, and again, you look at the Cuban Missile Crisis when the Soviet Union put missiles in Cuba. Kennedy immediately threatened nuclear war over that.
Right.
Now, the difference was, at least he and Khrushchev were talking, and they were able to negotiate a solution in 13 days. This has gone on now for years. Russia feels very much that this is a Western proxy war against it, which it is, and it honestly has acted very restrained in response to it, much more, again, than the U.S. would if the situations were reversed.
Right. And it's only thanks to that restraint that we're still here. Because when I thought in spring 2022, I thought there was going to be a nuclear war. And you know why? Because I was thinking in terms of the old Cold War mentality, which was that there was an unwritten rule. The U.S. and the Soviet Union, we can mess with each other in third world countries. but we don't mess with each other in Europe. And again,
Right.
that was like a ironclad rule. We don't, if the Soviets go into Czechoslovakia like they did in '68, it's not our problem. We're not going to get involved. And the Soviets, so there were these unwritten rules, and if those rules would have been broken, we knew it would have been nuclear war pretty quickly.
Right.
Escalation
Right.
pretty quickly. But today, as you know, the West is just run by really genuine, bona fide psychopaths, because
Yes,
they are willing to take us to the edge of the abyss.
they are.
Right?
And no other president was willing to do that. We always had presidents, as bad as they might have been, who saw one of their main tasks is preventing nuclear war. And Biden is an exception to that, or at least his administration. We don't know how much he's really in charge.
Yeah.
But his administration clearly is willing to risk nuclear war.
Yeah. Let's look at the issue with the gas supplies. I mean, have you been following the issue with the Russian gas? And maybe if you can just brief me, actually, what is the latest? From what I understand, is it January 1st? They're going to cut off the gas. They're going to stop the sales. Are you familiar with this topic about the transit with the Slovakia, and Slovakia wants its gas? What do you know about that?
Yeah, I did see that, and I think the Slovak is a president threatened Ukraine over that if they would stop the gas into Europe, because the Europeans need that gas. It would be more of a war against Europe than it would against Russia if Ukraine does that. Now, again, I think what it shows, of course, is, and we know this all along, is that the U.S., its proxy war itself is as much against Europe as it is against Russia.
Exactly. Good point.
But this is the type of thing that could lead to a war, just like the embargo of oil against Japan before, before they bombed Pearl Harbor. I mean, this is a very dangerous situation.
Yeah. By the way, a quick aside about the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And most Americans don't realize that in 1941, the U.S. was illegally occupying Hawaii. So technically speaking, that naval base should never have been there, because it was an illegal naval base on an island illegally occupied by the U.S. So Japan never attacked the U.S.
That's interesting. That's a great story.
Think about it. Hawaii used to be an independent kingdom, an independent country. It was internationally recognized kingdom in 1898, up until 1898 when the U.S. conquered it. So just a brief historical aside. So, because Americans think, again, I grew up in a U.S. government family, and I was raised with a fanatical hatred of the Japanese because they attacked us in December 1941. And then when I got older, I realized, wait, they didn't really attack us, did they? They attacked our naval base. They attacked our illegal naval base. So,
no, that's good. I know Hawaiians, by the way, who still think that they are independent and that Hawaii was never properly or legally annexed. So
yeah, right. Definitely. So about the was it interesting about Putin's comments? So again, going back to his public his meeting with the public, with the media just recently, with that little quip he made about Biden for pardoning Hunter, pardoning his son. Wait, Putin made this comment about he's human. He's acting more like a human and not like a politician, right? Do you remember this moment?
Yeah. Which is interesting. I mean, in a way, Putin showed us some sympathy towards Biden on that. Which again shows, Putin and the Russians don't hate the United States.
Right.
They don't even hate the U.S. leaders, right? It's a one-way. The hatred goes one way, and people need to know that. When you go to Russia, and you've been to Russia, if someone on the street finds out you're an American,
right,
they are very happy you're there and very happy to talk to you.
Right. Exactly. So I was twice in Russia in spring, and it had been my first time back since June 2019. So basically, that trip in March, two trips in March and May. So those two trips were my first, one of the few trips basically in the past 10 or 11 years, right? So for the most part, I haven't been in Russia since the end of 2012. So coming back again, that trip in June 19, that was a very short trip, 10 days. Whereas in spring, I was there 3 weeks each time.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the reason I went a second time, so I went in March for a conference, and my trip was so good. I mean, everything, the vibe was so positive in March. Those 3 weeks in March, the vibe was so positive that I'm thinking, this can't be right. This can't be real. Everyone's just being, it's just my imagination that everyone's being nice and good to me and kind. I'm like, I'm going to come back a second time, and then I'm sure people are going to be really rotten and mean to me, and they're going to hate me for being American. So I come back in May, and sure enough, everyone is wonderful, even more wonderful than the first time. People went out of the way to help me. And the question I kept getting from people was like, John, why does your government hate us? Why is your government trying to wage war? We just want to get along with you. I kept hearing that over and over again. And I mean, the answer, what is the answer? Why do they hate us? I think you said, like you said in the beginning, it's a conquest, right? It's, what do you think? Like, who really are these people, this ruling class in America? In essence, who are they?
Well, that's a great question. And what do they want? I mean, they want, Michael Parenti. I don't know if you know Michael Parenti, but he's one of my favorite thinkers and intellectuals. He was a socialist, still is, but he doesn't write anymore. But anyways, one of the things he said is, he says, what do the capitalists want? And he asked that rhetorical question. He said, everything.
Mm-hmm.
They want the world, right? Yeah. And the U.S. in particular has, this manifest destiny, which goes beyond the Atlantic to the Pacific. They want everything. They want the world. And anyone who stands up to them is seen as an enemy. And that's why they hate Russia. That's why they hate China. That's why they hate Iran. That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Wow. That's well said. Awesome. That is so well said, very succinctly, but you hit it right on the head. That in a nutshell, that's it. I mean, we could end all discussion on U.S. foreign policy right there.
Yeah.
And, I know because, again, I was raised in a U.S. government family. Dan, my father would inculcate into me this idea that, John, your generation, I was destined for government service. John, your generation will rule the world. I was raised like that.
Yeah.
I was raised with that. Yeah.
It is incredible. Well, hey, John, we're almost at 40 minutes.
Yeah.
We still have some more to talk about. I'm thinking maybe we could do a part 2.
Yeah.
Because I think this is a very good way to, as you say, good place to wrap up. I think very digestible. And I'm very grateful for you and your time. But let's schedule a part 2 of this.
Let's do that.
I would like to do that.
Yeah. Great. It's fun. Intellectual fun and just really great to talk about these issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. And I'm really happy to meet you. Really. It's my honor and pleasure.
Me too. My honor and pleasure. Thank you. Let's be in touch. Yeah.
Absolutely. Take care.